Assalamu alaikum. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Good evening. My name is Tayyib Rana. I am representing the leadership team from APPNA DMV and your host this evening for the ongoing APPNA DMV webinar series that we have been doing for the last couple of years. Co-hosting with me tonight from the APPNA DMV leadership team is Dr. Samia Piracha and Dr. Habib Chotani. I'd like to thank the entire viewership this evening. We have a good turnout for this evening's lecture on tax planning and asset protection. I'd also like to thank the executive committee for APPNA DMV, Dr. Nadra Khan, the president, Dr. Irfan Saeed, the secretary, and Dr. Irfan Suleiman, the treasurer. And of course, as always, I would like to send my great appreciation to the APPNA DMV community. This evening's webinar, as I stated, is about tax planning and asset protection. This, of course, is a pivotal year, and it's very important to keep abreast of this very important subject. Joining us tonight and teaching us with lots of excellent material is Mr. Syed Nishat. He is a partner at the Wall Street Alliance Group out of New York City. The Wall Street Alliance Group has done a great job with financial planning and financial advisory. They have been working with many APPNA chapters and Central APPNA, attended many meetings over the last several years. They've been great partners to educate us continuously on various topics. They did a fantastic job last year. If any of you got to attend the wonderful seminars they did on the COVID responses and stimuluses from the government and how we as physicians could help or be helped in this very stressful situation. Mr. Syed is an expert in many of these various fields. His article about asset protection and common financial mistakes that are made by physicians has been published in Medscape and Medical Economics. He's a regular guest on Bloomberg, Yahoo Finance, US News, and Forbes. So without further delay, I'd like to introduce Mr. Syed Nishat, and we'll go ahead and get started with the first question. Syed, good evening. How are you?
Thank you. I'm doing well, Dr. Rana. Thank you again for having me and inviting me to your event.
Thank you for being back. We really enjoy having you here. So Syed, let's get started. The first question is, can you kind of explain this some very important changes obviously coming up with this new administration and coming out of this, or actually still trying to come out of this COVID pandemic, that why is tax planning important, particularly this year? And can you highlight some of the proposed changes that are coming up under the Biden tax proposal and how it's going to impact physicians this year?
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Rana, for the question. It's an excellent question. And first of all, I would like to thank again, Dr. Rana, to you, Dr. Samia Piracha, and Dr. Habib Chotani from APPNA DMV for organizing this event. And also, I'd like to thank all the healthcare providers for their hard work and support during this pandemic. We at Wall Street Alliance Group provide wealth management solution for healthcare providers across the United States. Now, as you mentioned, taxes are a big issue this year because probably most of you know that Biden administration has just proposed a $3.2 trillion infrastructure bill. Whenever you pass such an infrastructure bill, there's typically a huge budget deficit. And the big question is, when you have a budget deficit, how are you going to pay for it? Who's going to pay for it? Most of the time, the simple answer is just by raising the taxes. That's the best way to achieve it. And Biden administration is very vocal, not only about increasing the income tax, but lowering the state tax exemption as well. Just to give you some of the synopsis of the overall bill and how it affects you, I would like to just share my screen real quick. There are different variants of this law that the bill is about to pass, but overall consensus is people who are making $400,000, they'll be affected the most, unfortunately. So just to show you how it affects, so let's say if your income is $400,000, your tax rate goes up from 37% to almost 39.6%. You may say, okay, it's a 2% jump, what's the big deal? The issue is for self-employed physician or any physician, any income more than $400,000, we're looking for additional Medicare tax or Social Security tax, which is 12.4%. So far, if you notice in your W-2 salary, the statement you receive, you don't pay any Social Security tax after the income of $137,000. If your income is more than $400,000, just to mitigate the gap of Social Security, they are taxing more Social Security tax for any income more than $400,000. That's a big jump. And if you're a self-employed physician, have your own LLC or S corporation, you can do something called itemized deduction. That's about to phase out if your income goes over 400,000. So again, 400,000 is a big number we're looking for. That's what the overall consensus is. But just in case, if your income is over $1 million, we're looking at a long-term capital gain to jump almost 39.6%. That includes dividend. Now, typically, when you buy a real estate or a stock, you hold on to it for more than a year, you only pay 20% tax. If your income more than $1 million, the proposal is raise the tax to almost close to the range of 40%. So again, this is still in the Congress. They are debating about it. Most likely, the bill will pass this year because the infrastructure bill is very popular. It will get passed as well. But as soon as it passes, it will go retroactively, not from next year, from this year. So that's why we are urging all our physician clients to sit down with your CPA, because there's some strategies you can implement to have your overall income down this year. But if you do some advanced planning, that can definitely help in your overall tax savings.
Thanks, Syed. Thank you so much. What are some of the important deductions that we should be looking out for before the end of the year?
Yeah, so obviously, people are looking for a different creative way to save money in taxes, but we are suggesting our clients a good starting point will be just go back to the tax provisions that were passed by the Trump administration in 2008. These are very powerful, though, if you follow closely. Those could be implemented in your overall tax planning because those are extremely useful to overall lower your tax. We see, and this law has been passed in 2018, and we see people still not claiming all this deduction. Just to give you an idea, that if you are a self-employed physician, you qualify for something called QBI, Qualified Business Income Deduction. We see a lot of misconception here. People say, hey, I'm a physician, I'm self-employed, I don't qualify for it. No, everyone qualifies for QBI if your income is below $415,000. So the way the QBI works, let's say your business income is $100,000, you can write off 20% of $100,000, which is $20,000 as a deduction without doing anything. So again, first thing, speak to your CPA about QBI for personal income. Second, there's a QBI for rental income as well. A lot of times we see a physician actually they pay themselves for rent or they actually have active rental properties. If you're collecting rent, that's part of overall adjusted gross income. So whatever rent you collect, you can write off 20% of the rent as a deduction without showing additional deduction. So that, for example, the way it works, if you have $50,000 rent coming in, 20% of $50,000, $10,000, you can write something called a QBI. Thirdly, there's something called accelerated depreciation or bonus depreciation. A lot of times people buy car for the use of business under the corporation. Typical deduction for a car is about $25,000. But remember that accelerated depreciation and bonus depreciation was passed in 2018. If you own a vehicle for more than 6,000 pounds, again, more than 6,000 pounds, you can write off the full purchase price of the car. Typical 6,000 pound cars are very expensive. It's at least $70,000 to $80,000. Again, bonus depreciation, write off the full purchase of the price if you need the car. Then the fourth one is the food expense deduction. So the reason I would like to mention it, typically, when you use expenses for business meal, the typical expenses is 50% of the value. This year, it jumped almost 100%, dollar per dollar. I'm not suggesting let's have a party every night and use this money for deductions. But obviously, if you have your own corporation, if you have legitimate expense, you will get a huge deduction as well, and that will definitely lower your overall taxes. And then itemized versus standard deduction. I just want to point out very quickly, we are saying that since 2018, all the CPS is going for something called standard deduction. What I mean by standard deduction, it doubled. It used to be $12,000, it becomes almost $22,000. All CPAs going for it. But we are suggesting sit down with your CPA, go through all the expenses you have, like mortgage expenses, like healthcare expenses, see if you can itemize it and go over the $22,000 limit. It will definitely help you to lower your taxes. Now, lumping of charitable giving, what I mean by that we all as a Muslim pay zakat. It's due next year. We all know that. Or people pledge to APPNA DMV or Citizen Foundation. We see it all the time. If you're going to give money anyway to next year, might as well you can just create something called a donor fund. Contribute the money into it that you're going to give anywhere next year. In this way, your overall taxes will go down because you can contribute 50% of your adjusted gross income or 30% or of securities you can give into a donor fund. And again, all the money are completely tax write-off. And lastly, I would like to mention that this is a new law. This is APPNA DMV, so I'm assuming some Maryland people are here. I'm personally from New York as well. So when you pay in April, you will be all paying something called a federal tax and state taxes. That's a due. Keep in mind, when you actually pay state tax and property tax, the maximum deduction is $10,000. Do whatever you do. That's the way the system works. It's called SALT, S-A-L-T. It's a cap to it, $10,000. State of Maryland, New York, New Jersey adopted a new law from this year. The personal taxes that is due, if you just pay from the corporation, will get the full write-off. It's extremely powerful though. So Maryland, the taxes are almost 7%. In $100,000, we're talking about almost $7,000 taxes. If you just pay from the corporation, you may have to pay a little bit more higher tax rate, but you can get to write off the full amount as the tax deduction. But again, these are all the strategies out there available. Sit down with your CPA and speak about if you can use any of them to lower your overall taxes so you don't get hurt too much by the Biden tax law changes.
That say the personal state tax payment, the states you mentioned there, is Virginia part of that, or do you know?
Yeah, so as of right now, Virginia, Maryland did it. Virginia, I think it's a matter of time they will do it. But as of right now, the answer is they're still debating about this.
Okay, thank you so much. I want to remind the audience that we do want to make this interactive. So Dr. Chotani and Dr. Piracha are standing by for your questions. So please do use the ask question feature on the Zoom link to ask those questions. Syed, obviously retirement plans are a great, they're excellent, one of the best vehicles in which we can save or protect ourselves from some of these high marginal income tax rates and the capital gains, but particularly for 2021. Can you expand on that, please?
Yeah, so after you sit down with your CPA about all the deduction, another good way to reduce your taxes, obviously, is when you contribute to a retirement account. Like every $10,000 you contribute to a retirement account, if you're in a 35% tax bracket, we're looking at a tax saving immediately of $3,500. There are different types of retirement account out there, but just to give you an idea how a cash balance plan works, a cash balance plan work is similar to a combination of 401k profit sharing or defined benefit plan, where at the age of 60, you can contribute almost $260,000, and this money is completely tax deductible. But again, this number $260,000, it depends on the salary you take. It also depends on your age and the number of years you're working. But again, the important thing, it depends on your salary. So you have until December to fix your salary, because if the salary is down, cash balance contribution goes down. So that's why it's important to sit down with your CPA. How much salary can you afford to take so you can contribute the maximum amount in a cash balance plan? And if you're a 35% tax bracket and $260,000, we're talking about almost $90,000 tax saving immediately there. And it will definitely help you to qualify not only QBI, I talked about in previous slide, but also help you to overall lower your income so you don't get hit by the 400,000 threshold we are talking about. If you don't want to contribute too much, there's always a SEP IRA available, and a SEP IRA, again, is a 20% of your W-2 wage, or 57,000, whichever is less, you can contribute. Explanatory IRA account, you can contribute $7,000 for you, $7,000 for your spouse over the age of 50, and you have actually until April to do it for the year 2021. You have to do it now. And lastly, HSA account, Dr. Rana, we see is one of the most underutilized strategy from physician. Very rare we see physicians go to doctor because the physicians themselves, they take care of themselves. And we see they go for the low deductible health insurance possible. Premiums is very expensive, high, but the best way, in our opinion, to achieve it is go for HSA account. It's called high deductible, health savings account is called. It's only available if you have a high deductible health insurance. Typical, the deductible for the family needs to be around close to $11,000 to $12,000 for the whole year. Then you qualify for the HSA. For HSA account for the family itself, you can contribute almost $7,100. Again, it's a pre-tax money. And then after the age of 66, you can use the HSA money for non-health reason as well, as a retirement mechanic as well. So it's extremely powerful, it's underutilized. We suggest that physician definitely take a look into the HSA account if it's possible or not.
Yeah, I agree, Syed. I think HSAs are one of those vehicles that are either just poorly understood and definitely underutilized, and I think should be utilized more. Dr. Chotani or Dr. Piracha, are you any questions that have come in that we could take a moment and ask from the audience?
Yeah, there are a few questions. I'm going to ask the first two, and then Samia will ask the next one. Syed Nishat, if you can go to your previous slide. One of the questions, and I think it's more a comment, that they have heard that the deduction, the state deduction, may also be available for California soon next year. So that's one thing, one comment. And then the other question was that $400,000 figure, is it for gross income or taxable income?
Yeah, so it's a great question. The first question for California, again, it's similar situation like Virginia. They are talking about this, but it's a democratic state. If New York can do it, California can do it too. I'm assuming it will be very soon, in my opinion. The second question is the 400,000 is an adjusted gross income. So what I mean by that, let's say if your income is $600,000, then you can get to write off everything and the income comes down to $500,000. It's $500,000, that's the amount they're looking for, adjusted gross income. So that's why we mentioned it's very important to try to come up with expenses. Don't do too many buy, sell stocks, mutual funds, or dividends, because that's get added to the overall income.
Dr. Piracha, do you have any other question right now from the audience, or shall we move on?
Yeah, we have a few more, so let's get a couple more in, then we can move on and get the rest of them. So we have a question about the Roth. Is it a good idea to convert Roth from our pre-tax plans if we have sufficient funds to pay the taxes?
Yeah, so that was actually one of the points we were going to talk about, the Roth conversion and then the Roth IRA. The reason why I think this year, Dr. Rana and Samia, is important because I didn't mention it to the first slide because the bills keep coming as of today. I couldn't even put it in. One of the bills were saying that after this year, the Roth conversion is not allowed if your income is more than 400,000. So yes, if this goes away, Roth IRA is in trouble. So yes, if you have enough money, and obviously I cannot generically make a comment, yes, you should do it. I obviously have to take a look at your overall situation. But yes, it's a good idea if you have enough funds. But you have to do a strategy in such a way to convert the positions that are into a loss. For example, let's say you have a stock, let's say Tesla. I'm giving an example. Stock, you bought it for 800, stock is right now 700. Convert that stock. Stock is down right now. The reason is because the 700 stock, you convert it from a pre-tax to post-tax. Now the 700 goes back to $1,000, there's no taxes due. But if you are converting a stock that are, let's say at the very high, if it goes down, it may backfire. The reason is because the whole idea of conversion is that appreciation will happen. So the best way to do it, usually when the market is down, convert it. But again, I cannot generically say you should definitely do it, but it's a good idea to do it. Sit down with your financial advisor, whether it makes sense for you or not.
Okay, sounds good. And then we have just two more questions, and then I think Tayyib, we can move on. One is a general question. If your income is over 400,000, what are your tips to save on the taxes, which you may be going through without the presentation? And then the second question is, I received PPP in 2020, but it has not yet been forgiven. Do I declare that as an income? The request is in process.
Yes, so obviously this whole presentation is about tax planning and not necessarily PPP, but just to give an idea, PPP, if you receive in 2020, it is not part of your income. You don't pay any taxes on it. So the way the process works, if it's not forgiven, either you actually have to return the money back. It's not a part of the income though. You have to pay interest in it and return the money back. That's the way that the process works. So depending on how much is your income, you can talk to us or your CPA, they can give you guidance why it's not forgiven. Just to answer a brief answer to the question.
And you have one more, Sami?
We can move on and then come back to these if you like, whatever you like.
Yes,
Okay, sure.
ask one more question here. I
Go.
think maybe it's related. Once you contribute maximum 401, can you do IRA?
Yeah, you can, and that's what we're going to talk about the next question. That after you have done the 401k, can you do something else? You can do IRA as well, but no deduction, and I'll explain to you into a Roth IRA.
Okay, great. So Syed, how about, I mean, what about physicians who work for hospitals? You know, they're employed physicians. I mean, what kind of options do they have?
Yeah, it's a great question also. So we so far spoke about the self-employed physician, but for physicians who are hospital-based, you have until December to max out your 401k, 457 plan, and a 409A plan. So 401k plan over the age of 50, you can contribute almost $26,000. Again, this all money is pre-tax. You can, on top of the 401k, talk to your hospital if it's non-profit, you may be qualified to contribute to the 457 plan. In a 457 plan, there's no match. It's just a deferred money. You can again contribute up to $26,000. Again, it's a pre-tax, but there's no match into it. And the last one is a 409A plan. 409A plan is a deferred compensation plan. It's a terminology for that as well. But the contribution amount is much higher than 401k and 457, depending on the hospital you work for. It sometimes goes as high as 90% of your salary. There's a problem with that. 409A, 457, the principal are not guaranteed if the hospital filed for bankruptcy. That's the generic rule. So that's why we're not saying go ahead and put every money into it. But if your income is very high, the hospital allows it, I think it's worthwhile to put some money into the 409A, 457 on top of the 401k as well. Once you max out the pre-tax, someone just asked a question. I think that's the next question. Can we contribute to something else? You can open an IRA account and contribute money into it. You cannot actually have one 401k, one IRA and get both deductions. It's not possible. Once you max out 26,000, you can contribute up to $7,000 into an IRA account over the age of 50. But what happened is it's going to be a post-tax money. Again, there's no deduction. It's going to grow tax deferred. So since it's post-tax money, we recommend at that time convert it into a Roth IRA. Because it's a post-tax anyway, why would you just like let it grow? So the best thing is do something called, it's called conversion to a Roth IRA, called this terminology called backdoor Roth IRA. So once you convert it, so the way the process works, you open the IRA account, you open a Roth IRA at the same time, immediately flip it. Since you're flipping it immediately, there's no taxes are due at that time. And the beauty is once you flip it, you have a Roth IRA, money goes tax-free, withdrawal is also tax-free until you take the money out until the age of 60. And Dr. Rana, we were doing a math with our client in New Jersey, husband and wife, both over the age of 50. We did the math, $7,000 both. 20 years they contribute. If a 7% growth happened, the value becomes almost $700,000.
Yeah,
tax-free,
wow.
Very powerful. So I think again, it's one of the underutilized strategy. Backdoor Roth IRA, definitely physicians should consider opening a backdoor Roth IRA and Roth conversion as well, because this may go away this year.
Say, before we move on from the backdoor Roth IRA, just to expand on that a little bit, because this question has come up several times, that are there income limits on who can do the backdoor Roth IRA or Roth conversions, like regular Roth IRA accounts?
No, there's no income limit. That's the beauty of it. You cannot directly contribute into a Roth IRA. That's why the term called backdoor. So, and I think it's in 2013 or 14, they actually implemented this law that you can convert it. In conversion, there's no income restriction there.
Great. Okay. Thank you for clarifying that. And how about, I know we touched upon this a little bit, but what about other tax deduction vehicles besides retirement accounts? Anything else we can expand on there?
Yeah, so once you actually do the deferred fully into retirement account, get the deductions, now you need more deductions. So they are possible for physicians who own different businesses. For example, it's not uncommon for physicians to have their own practice or they invest into real estate. When you invest into real estate, we're suggesting try to take a look into opportunity zone when you invest into it. It's very popular getting for the last few years. The beauty of opportunity zone is once you actually own the property for more than 10 years into opportunity zone, there's no capital gain taxes on it once you sell the property. It's extremely powerful. What is opportunity zone? Is in an area with a 20% poverty rate. That's what the opportunity zone means. So again, it is very powerful. If you are into real estate, try to invest into opportunity zone if you can. Second, 5 to 9 contribution. We all have children, and if you contribute into the 5 to 9 by December, some states allow state tax deduction. For example, New York, I'm sitting here, almost 10,000 per beneficiary. I have 2 kids now. I'll contribute 20,000, 7% is almost $1,400 state tax deduction. Is extremely powerful for me. Tax harvesting and offset profit, that's also important. Like someone just mentioned, the $400,000, is it a gross? It is adjusted gross income. So that means, let's say your salary is 400,000, but you bought, sell stock a lot this year and the beginning of the year till now, and you make $100,000 gain, that is part of your income. So if you have a lot of gains this year, try to actually take some losses into some stocks as well. So you can do something like tax harvesting, and you don't have to worry about paying those income as a tax. And I would like to also talk a little bit about cost segregation, because nowadays we see physicians have invest into surgical centers, quite common we see, or they actually have their own building and they're actually paying themselves for rent. It's quite common nowadays. So one thing to keep in mind, that the income you're collecting, that's part of your income, of your adjusted gross income. There's something called cost segregation. What cost segregation does, every building, commercial unit you have it, the typical depreciation is about 40 years. What I mean by that every year the depreciation happens, you get to write off from the income you're collecting. You can do a cost segregation study. What it does, it brings down the depreciation from 40 years to only 5 years. What happens in this way, you get a bigger depreciation, you can get to write off from any rental income you're collecting. So technically, you pay no taxes on the income, the rental income you're collecting. So again, all you're doing is doing advanced depreciation. So if you're having a lot of rental income, think about cost segregation. And just to give a real example, we had a client in Texas, had his own surgical center, $1 million the client bought. We did a cost segregation, almost $250,000 we got advanced depreciation. The client would have been got in 40 years. We just got it immediately. And the client was about 35% tax bracket. We save about $87,000 taxes immediately for the client. So up to $250,000 rental income the client collects, he will pay no rental income taxes. So it's extremely powerful. Talk to your CPA if you own a lot of real estate. And lastly, charitable contribution. This is not, there's no way I can cover this whole charitable planning in today's webinar. It's a webinar of its own. But those people, let's say over the age of 72, they are giving money to, as I mentioned, APPNA DMV or other chapters. You can just give directly money from your retirement account as a donation. So this money will not be part of income. We can talk one-on-one and talk about whether this charitable contribution makes sense for you or not.
Thank you, Syed. And I just want to remind the local members of the audience from the DMV chapter that, as Syed just mentioned, you can certainly contribute to the DMV chapter itself, which is doing some incredible humanitarian projects, if that's your taste. Syed, moving on. Well, before we do that, Samia, any questions again from the audience? Let's not. We don't want to forget those.
I'll start with this one. One question is, will the tax write-off also be available for employed physicians for the above 6,000 pounds rule?
Well, you have to have outside income beside the W-2 in order to write this off. So if you do locum, if you have 1099 income, you can get to write off, but you cannot just get to write off on the W-2.
Okay.
Habib, how about on your end?
Yeah, one more question is, I'm looking at selling my practice for about 2 million by the end of the year. Are there any strategies for me? Can I still purchase a car?
Yeah, in your case, obviously, I don't know this client situation, but number one thing, obviously, it's not, we are not covering today because the Q&A, there's only so many we can think of, but as a financial advisor, I will tell you to speak to CPA, something called a goodwill, when you actually write the contract. When you're going to sell this practice for 2 million, you'll be paying almost capital gain tax. Is going to be almost 40% immediately. Goodwill, the capital gain, the tax rate is not 40%, is only 20%, which is a long-term capital gain. So typically we would like to see the ratio 50-50, like 50% goodwill, 50% long-term capital gain. So that is more powerful than buying a car from the corporation. Typically, the whole idea of buying a car, you can use it for long-term, but if business is selling, you just bought a car selling the business, it doesn't look too good. So I'll speak to your CPA about this. But for this particular case, speak to your CPA and your attorney about goodwill, which is more powerful.
That's very good information to know.
One
ahead,
more
Habib.
question is that, is the 409A money pre or post-tax?
Pre-tax. Yeah, 90% of your money you're contributing into pre-tax. So, but it's similar to 457. It's a pre-tax money. There's no match into it. So when you leave the job, they give you money back. You can make an arrangement. Don't give me now. Give me after 5 years. It's all fine. The only caveat to it, the principal is not creator protected.
Samia, another question from the audience?
Sure, we have a lot rolling in, but let me get to one more. I did a 500,000 rollover from my IRA to Roth IRA. How badly will the new tax plan affect this conversion?
Yeah, so if the tax law goes through, this year is going to be retroactively. So unfortunately, that's why I think it's very important that when the market goes down, do it, because if you just did it now and the market is very high, suddenly your income, your adjusted gross income, you have to add the $500,000 on top of it. So you're in a high tax bracket immediately. We usually do a latter movement when we do a Roth conversion. So the way the process worked, the market a few days ago fell, do a Roth conversion during that time. That's a better way of doing it throughout the year. Mistakes we see people in one shot do it, unless you can time it 100%. But yes, the taxes are due, of the whole amount that you converted in April. Don't have to do it paid now. In April, the taxes are due.
Let's do one more question before we move on to the different subject matter. Habib, do you have?
So this is about an HSA account, and the question is, can we contribute 7,100 every year to the HSA if it is not completely used?
Yeah, so remember, there's a difference between a flex saving account and HSA account. Flex saving account, you have to use it the same year. HSA is keep rolling. There's nothing wrong about this. It just have to be used for health-related reason before the age of 66. After 66, non-healthy is fine.
Great. Say, let's move on to the importance of estate planning. If you could, subject that some people are comfortable with, but I think most people are very uncomfortable with just because they don't know much about it. So if you could please open up a discussion about estate planning for physicians.
Yeah, I think estate planning, Dr. Rana, during pandemic, what I have learned in my experience is one of the most important but most neglected aspect of financial planning. One of my best clients in Texas recently passed away due to COVID. There's no way, obviously, I can measure the loss, but having a proper will and trust, give the closure to the family and allow them to focus on his health during this difficult time. So I think it's extremely important for this type of situation for healthcare provider like you all who are a high-risk job, definitely get a will and trust done. Like I cannot imagine this client of mine not having a will and trust, because just to give you an idea, if this client didn't have a will, something as simple as the custody of the children would have been decided by the US government. And his assets would have been going through a long probate process. And South Mississippi, Texas, Alabama, we're talking about probates as high as almost 6 months to 7 months. Meanwhile, the beneficiary need money, they don't have access to it. So that's why I think it's very important for physician get at least the basic will and trust estate planning as soon as possible.
And what are the common mistakes that people do in terms of estate planning, especially physicians? What should they avoid?
Yeah, I think the number one mistakes we have seen, we talk about these webinars, the importance of will and trust. What happened, people go back, immediately go to LegalZoom or go to an attorney, get a will and trust done and say, voila, we are done. You're not done. Because the first thing you have to do, you have to move everything under the name of the trust. What I mean by moving, that the house should be under the name of the trust. From your name, you have to move it to the trust you created. The retirement account, the beneficiary must be changed from your name to the trust name. The brokerage account and everything you have it, all the properties you have it, is to be titled properly under the name of the trust. If you don't title it, if you don't move it, it might as well not have anything, because if you die, if all goes to the probate process, anything, it's just a piece of paper just collecting dust. So make sure you fund it. That's number one. Number two, mistakes we make in the trust, once you create it, if anything happens to husband, wife, both, they give it directly under the name of the children. It's one of the biggest mistakes you can make, because think logically, tomorrow the children becomes older, they get into, they get married, they get into divorce or lawsuit, the assets become half. The best way to give it to an irrevocable trust, to the trust, if anything happens to you, the assets goes to the children under the trust, and assets are protected from lawsuits and divorce. So that's why it's very important to draft the trust properly. So these are the two major mistakes we have seen, and hopefully a good qualified financial advisor or an attorney should be able to help them further.
So I'm assuming that just having a good will is not enough for proper estate planning then.
Yeah, so what happened is since 2018, another misconception we're seeing, they're saying, hey, my net worth is not substantial, I just need a will. Wait a second. The whole idea of creating a trust is not the net worth, it is probate. That's the whole idea behind it. So it doesn't happen tomorrow, Dr. Rana, that if you die, tomorrow the court is coming to you, here's your asset, by the way. It doesn't work this way. So the way it works, you have to take the copy of the will, send it to court through FedEx or UPS. The court takes it, and the personnel have to authenticate the will. Authentication, that takes about a few weeks to a few months, depending the state you live in. Meanwhile, your beneficiary need the money, they have no access to it. So that's why will itself is not enough. The best way to accomplish it, to have a revocable trust as well. So the revocable trust is a private document. You can create, for example, Syed Nishat Family Trust. You create it. Once you create it, you move the house under the name of the trust, the retirement account under the name of the trust. If anything happens to me and my wife, the trust tomorrow will be moved to my trust, no court, nothing whatsoever. So the best, and physician, always we see they have high net worth, they have other properties, retirement account. So we highly recommend to have a revocable trust as well beside of it.
Great point, great point. Let's go back to the audience questions. Habib, Samia.
So I'm gonna ask a few questions on 529, which the audience has put up. The first question is 529 is pre-tax or post-tax contribution. The next one is up to how many accounts can you have with 529 for tax deduction? And the third question is that which is a better 529 plan? It says HURD Utah plan is better.
Okay, let me ask the first question, try to answer that. The 5 to 9, we always recommend state specific. For example, Virginia, you should open the Virginia 5 to 9. If you open New York, you're not going to get the deduction. So first thing to look for, okay? Number two, it's not pre-tax money, it's a post-tax money. But the money grows tax-free. Withdrawal is also tax-free as long as you use it for qualified tuition and expenses. And the third thing, you can open as many 5 to 9 as you want to. That's absolutely fine. But if it's state specific, I mean, obviously it will allow you to only one. But just to give you an idea, for state of Texas, there's no deduction in it. I mean, you can open one Maryland, one Utah, wherever you want to, that's absolutely fine. But obviously it crowded the 5 to 9, unless like you really want to diversify way too much, doesn't make too much of a sense. So, but yeah, 1 or 2 is absolutely fine. Now, in terms of what is the best one, our recommendation is try to take a look at the Morningstar rating, number 1, and number 2 is the expense ratio. Try to look for it. Usually, all 5 to 9 the returners are kind of same. Is the expense ratio that makes a huge difference, and also the service is also very important as well. For example, Fidelity, American funds have good service. It doesn't mean that New York doesn't have a good service. So I would say it's all at par. It depends on your comfort level. We cannot endorse one particular 5 to 9, but I recommend that if you speak to a financial advisor, if it's possible, they should be able to give you proper guidance.
Just to follow up, I think for the state of Virginia, for example, you can get a specific amount of tax deduction in the 529 plan.
Correct. It's about $4,000.
Yes.
So 6% of $4,000 to $40 ballpark.
And also, just to jump in, I think Syed, also maybe you can mention about the principal preservation strategies in certain 529, including in Virginia, versus those exposed to more market forces.
Yes, absolutely. So the best way I recommend is we recommend usually is the age-based portfolio, because keep in mind 529 is state-sponsored plan. You cannot flip-flop like mutual funds into it. Twice a year is allowed. So we suggest to go with the age-based portfolio. If someone is going college in, let's say, 2023, just choose 2023 age-based program. They usually they manage themselves, one fund, overall conservative, market goes down, we don't see so much of a fluctuation. And try to take a look at the loads. Make sure go for the no load fund, mutual funds. But if you speak to your advisor, they should be able to definitely give you proper guidance.
Samia, a question on yours?
Yeah, we have a couple about the trust. Can a trust be established with the assistance of an attorney only, or do you need to have the attorney work with the CPA? And let's see, do you recommend your revocable trust to be beneficiary of your 401k or IRA?
Yeah, these are great questions, actually. So when you do the estate planning, unfortunately, depending on how big is your estate, we usually require a 360-degree angle look. We typically have a financial advisor, have a CPA and attorney work hand in hand. But if you have just one house and a retirement account, then maybe just an attorney can take care of it and fund it. But if you have a little bit more than that, we usually recommend speak to your CPA, because there could be some tax consequences you're not aware of as well. So we recommend have a CPA, financial advisor, and usually the financial advisor speak to your CPA and the attorney and coordinate all of this for you. That's typically how it works, number one. Number two, the revocable trust, you mentioned the beneficiary. So the primary beneficiary must be your spouse. So for example, husband, if anything happens to me, my wife will be the primary beneficiary. The secondary beneficiary must be the trust. That's the way it works. Don't make the primary beneficiary the trust, though. The wife doesn't want to go to the trust. The wife should have inherited IRA account. That's very important. So that's why primary is spouse, secondary is a revocable trust, vice versa. That's the way it works.
Okay, any other right now, Sami, before I move on? Okay, so I know that you touched upon this in some of these audience questions, but again, just want to sort of take home the key points, Syed, that why is asset protection, particularly important for physicians?
Yeah, I think asset protection is extremely important for physician, is because physicians tend to be into a high-risk job, what they do. And we were looking at the statistic by American Medical Association, 60% of physicians over the age of 50 get lawsuit at least once, complain at least once. And this statistic is quite higher for certain profession like OB/GYN and surgeon. We usually recommend to definitely speak to your financial advisor or an attorney to at least have some basic asset protection strategies available out there. And we have a client in California, infectious disease doctor, 52 years old, always worry, what if we get a lawsuit due to COVID? Because the recent provision passed by Congress doesn't have any elements of asset protection for small business. So I think physicians definitely sit down with their financial advisors and their CPAs and their attorneys and come down with some basic estate planning strategy that is possible. So just in case if you get frivolous lawsuit, the assets are protected.
And say people get worried that, asset protection, if I get into this estate planning, it's going to cost me lots of money, it starts to worry some people. This becomes almost like a roadblock or a mental roadblock. Are there asset protection strategies that are more cost effective?
Yeah, absolutely. I completely, Dr. Rana, couldn't agree with you more. And all the time we talk about asset protection, they say, okay, stop it. I mean, I'm done, estate planning, get it done. I don't want to talk anymore. I have other things to do. I completely get it. But, and then there's a big concern about using anytime they heard the word attorney, they say, here we go, 5,000-6,000 right there. I completely get it. But in this slide pertaining to the state of Maryland and Virginia, so this law is not applicable for all the states, but just to give you an idea, you can sit down and speak to your financial advisor who can give you some basic state laws that can actually protect you. It doesn't cost you much or perhaps nothing to implement these statutes. Each state has their statute. If you get a lawsuit, the assets are protected. For example, when you buy a house, if you just buy the house, something called joint tenants in entirety, it's just a title. If you get a lawsuit, it has a very good elements of asset protection in Virginia, in Maryland, both states, and in Pennsylvania. I would say, depending on the state you live in. Number two, another best way to actually guard your asset for physician, if husband and wife have a good understanding, transfer the assets under the non-spouse names, majority of it. So again, if the relationship is good, definitely is a good way to accomplish it. So in this way, if the wife owns the assets, who's non-spouse, no one can go after her assets because she's not part of the judgment call. Also, another good way of creating this low-cost asset protection is creating an LLC. LLC doesn't cost too much in Virginia, New York, or Maryland. So LLC costs about a few $100 we have seen. You just need an operating agreement, and it has a very good elements of asset protection. So don't have the assets title under your name. If you have rental property, have it under the name of an LLC. So if any tenant break the leg or any injury happen, only the assets under the name of the LLCs are actually exposed. The rest of the assets usually are protected. And then we always, that's why I recommend, if you just forget about even the tax planning, 401ks, IRAs, annuities, 529 life insurance, the reason why people should invest regardless is because it has elements of asset protection. It's just not about tax saving or investment we're talking about. It has elements of very good asset protection. So that's why people or physicians should definitely invest into it. And then lastly, I will talk about umbrella policy. The problem with the umbrella policy is, Dr. Rana, that if a lawsuit happens, it doesn't cover professional liability. It just only covers like if you have non-professional liability, injury, and everything they cover. So typically we recommend about $2 million umbrella policy, very cheap. You can get it done from State Farm, companies like this, or whoever your mortgage broker is, you can just get it done. An umbrella policy, try to get it for non-professional reason, it can give you protection as well. Even after doing all of this, you find that your stats are substantial enough, then definitely we can sit down one-on-one and talk about domestic asset protection trust, Nevada asset protection trust, family limited partnership, very strong. These vehicles give you asset protection, but definitely it does involve attorney and cost a decent amount of money, about, I would say, $3,000 to $7,000.
Before we move on to a couple more of the audience questions, I do want to move on to this point about the impact that Biden's proposals on estate planning itself. What are those proposals and how will they impact physicians as far as estate planning is concerned?
Yeah, so in America, there's a proverb, there's always called, debt and taxes are there, right? So there's something called income tax in America. There's something called debt tax you have to pay. Unfortunately, the debt tax kicks in once your net worth is more than 22 million. Trump has increased it to almost 22 million after husband-wife both dies. There's a estate tax is due. But the Biden administration is trying to lower it and bring it down to the previous level, which is altogether about 11.7 million. So husband-wife both dies. If net worth is more than 11.7 million, there's a 40% state tax is due. So usually young physician, that may not be a problem, but physicians who are close to retirement, they do accumulate substantial amount of wealth. And if you see that you are into the cusp of this over 11 million, sit down with your financial advisor and your CPA and your attorney, come up with some strategy, because this most likely will get passed next year. So maybe you have some time. Don't quote me into it, but as soon as possible, if you see if your net worth is more than 11 million, sit down with your financial advisor if there's any strategy that could be implemented or not.
Great. And I do have a couple of questions about the death tax, but before we get into that, let's go back to Samia and Habib for some more audience questions, please.
Okay, so I have a question about what is the maximum contribution for backdoor IRA?
Yeah, so it's an IRA contribution. So IRA contribution over the age of 50, you can contribute $7,000. All right. And then the money immediately, you're flipping it to a backdoor Roth IRA, $7,000 per individual.
Thanks, Habib. Samia?
Can 10,000 be given each year to each child, or is it the limit for all children for one given year?
So, basically, for each child per parent, you can give $15,000. 15 times 2 is $30,000. You can contribute to the 529 or any other vehicle. You can just give as a gift. No taxes due. So 30,000 per child.
Next question, Syed. I moved my second home to trust, but primary home is still under mine and my wife's name. I understand that primary home is protected. Should I change it to trust as well?
It depends on the state you live in, if the primary house is protected. So for example, as I mentioned, in Virginia, in Maryland, we would like to see the title joint tenants in entirety. So if you have a joint trust, if you just move it, it gives you the same elements of asset protection as joint tenants in entirety. So I would sit down with the attorney to simplify it, whether it makes sense or not. But sometimes it does make sense to just leave it outside the trust, because what happened that once you, for example, Florida, just to give an idea, Florida actually have a home state asset protection. Once you move it into a trust, a lot of attorneys say, don't do it, just keep it under your, don't involve trust into it, because the state statute just says joint or individual. It has home state protection. Why bring in trust into it? Attorney says that. So I would recommend it, depending on the state, speak to your advisor. Depending on the circumstances, they can give you proper guidance.
And just a follow-up thing, if the house is under the physician and spouse name, will it be protected in case of a lawsuit?
Yeah, so that's what we're, so if it comes down to the state you live in. So if the joint tenancy, not all states are joint tenants in entirety. It's only about 12 states that follow the protocol. If you're not one of those states, then definitely you should, or I cannot use the word exactly should into the webinar without understanding the full situation. But ideally, we would like to see it, if the state doesn't have the joint tenancy of entirety, primary house, have it under the name of a spouse who's non-physician.
Samia?
Okay, here's a question. Says, for example, I made a trust and once I passed away, it'll be transferred to children under their trust with them as trustee. Will the assets under my child's trust be protected from divorce?
Yeah, it's a good way of doing it. That's what we're recommending, that the children should have their own trust. It's called a descent trust. It's called descendant trust. So as long as they keep the money under the name of the trust, so the way the revocable trust for Dr. Chotani and Samia and Rana works, you create a revocable trust. Husband, wife both dies. By law, it becomes irrevocable. It flips. And irrevocable assets, if a lawsuit happens, divorce happens, all protected. So all the children have to do that, the parent trust, it will becomes irrevocable at the time you move it. The children will open their own trust. So basically a child trust is creating, and you're just moving the trust for each children. Each children keep the assets under the name of the trust. Divorce happens, lawsuits happens, all assets are protected because that trust now is irrevocable. And whatever the children wants to buy, a car, buy a house, buy under the name of the trust, is there to control.
Great, excellent. We'll come back to the audience questions. I know we'll try to not make this evening session too long, but these are very important questions, so we'll try to get to as many as we can. Syed, going back to the estate planning, we were talking about the death taxes. Are there some strategies that physicians can use to avoid paying the high death taxes? If you could please expand on that.
Yeah, so, one of the best way to do it, obviously, as Samia asked the question that can you gift to your children? Yes, you can gift, but you can actually gift from your state almost 22 million this year if you want to an irrevocable trust. And, you don't have to worry about paying any state taxes. That's one way of doing it. So if your states are less than 20 million, you know that the exemption will go down to 11 million, maybe a few million, just give it to the children right now if you want to, and this money is out of your state. Every year, like I mentioned, 15,000 per child you can give as a gift, and there's no gift taxes due, number two. Number three, if you want to do any of this, you can just buy a cheap life insurance policies. Any company, you can just shop around called second to die life insurance policy. So the way it works, if the husband dies and wife both dies, then the life insurance benefit kicks in. And this benefit and this life insurance value will be used to pay for whatever state tax might be due. Now, a lot of times we see that the life insurance the physician own under their own name. Just keep in mind that there's no taxes due on the life insurance benefit you receive when you die, but it is added to your state though. Just keep in mind. I hope I can communicate with the audience. So let's say if your net worth is 22 million, you have a life insurance for 5 million. If you die, there's no income tax due, but this 5 million is added to your estate. So if it goes over 22 million, now your income, your estate tax is due. So one way to accomplish it is you can create a life insurance trust and move the money into a life insurance trust and it's out of your estate. This is one way of doing it. And lastly, I spoke about it and I won't be able to cover the whole thing, charitable remainder trust. I spoke, if your net worth is, let's say 30, 40 million, you want to give it to charity and collect as an income. If that's your situation, call us. We can sit down with you one-on-one and let you know if charitable remainder trust makes sense for you or not. But the strategy could be either or none of them. There's no way we can tell which one is applicable for you, but a good advisor should be able to give you proper guidance.
Thanks, Syed. And I want to get on to the changes again that are coming in the tax laws, particularly that apply to estate planning. But how about things like the Secure Act, and how does it impact physicians? And what are some ways that physicians can reduce the tax burden from the Secure Act?
Yeah, the Secure Act, obviously, this is something already been passed. It's not in the bill. It's nothing to do with Biden bill. It would become law in the year 2020. All right. So this effect, depending on how big is your retirement account. So typically what used to happen, Dr. Rana, that if you die, if your children inherit the money, they have their whole life to slowly take the money out. It's called stretching. And the money grows and they take the money. They have the whole life to stretch. So money grow and then they take out less taxes due. Secure Act is a law that passed last year. It's called Setting Up for the Whole Community for Retirement Enact. That's what Secure Act means. According to Secure Act now, what happened if husband, wife, basically both dies, the children who are non-minor, now they have to exhaust the retirement account within 10 years. You can say, hey, what's the big deal? It is a big deal. I mean, just to give an exact example in my slide, let's say, I have 5 million and husband, wife both dies. My child inherited the money, the $5 million. My child previously had the whole life to slowly take the money out. The same child right now, the $5 million either have to take $500,000 every year or take 5 million at the end of 10 years. Either way, we're talking about a huge amount of tax my child is due. So that's one problem we have it. So usually we're seeing it's a big burden for high net worth people who are at the age of 72. All physicians contribute. If you look at my whole financial plan presentation, we all talk about 401k. So 401k, everyone has funds. So it's not uncommon for have them to 5-6 million into the retirement. So it will somehow affect them. So some sort of strategy should be implemented for physicians to mitigate the burden you will get from Secure.
And any other protections from that high tax penalization?
Yeah, there are a few things you can do. The solution for pretty much everything, if you speak to good qualified financial advisors or a CPA, one option could be like someone mentioned about Roth conversion. It makes it more popular is because remember the Roth IRA also are subject to the 10 years rule, but there's no tax on distribution though. So it makes sense that, hey, convert the Roth. If you have a huge IRA account, the burden is about to come, convert some money to Roth IRA, leave it for the children. Number two, typically, Dr. Rana, we always recommend that, hey, leave IRA account for the children, use Roth IRA first because there's no taxes. Now you can do the opposite. What I mean by opposite, that one option could be that you can actually start withdrawing more money from the IRA account, use it for yourself, really leave Roth IRA for your children. That could be one way of doing it. Remember, the Secure Act impact non-minor. So if a child is minor, let's say 5 years, 6 years, one option could be if you have a grandchild, just make them the beneficiary of the retirement account. So again, your situation, depending on that, we can give you suggestion which one is applicable for you. You can again buy a life insurance policy that can pay for the income taxes that might be due from Secure Act. And then, as I mentioned, that people who are charity minded, they can give contribution from retirement account, and this money will be used up quickly at this time. Or the other solution could be a combination of all of it. So we don't know what your situation is, but that's why it's important that you sit down one-on-one with a qualified fiduciary financial advisor who can give you overall guidance based on your situation.
Thank you, Syed. Let's go back to Habib and Samia for the audience.
I'll go ahead with the first question. Is trust protected from malpractice lawsuit?
Yeah, so irrevocable trusts have elements of asset protection. So one thing all physicians, everyone have to keep in mind, there's nothing called 100% asset protection, nothing like that. All right, if you get a lawsuit and you're thinking that, you know what, everything is protected, it's not. Even if you've done domestic asset protection trust, Nevada asset protection trust, just keep in mind, all it does, it make it difficult for the creditors to get the funds. So hopefully you will settle somewhere. That's the whole idea behind it. Imagine like, you know what, you get a shot, but you have a bulletproof jacket you're wearing, you get hurt. That's what the irrevocable trust is doing. So as long as we understand it's an irrevocable trust, it has an element as a protection, it will help you if you get a lawsuit.
Samia?
We have one, how do we use 529s for estate planning purposes?
Yeah, so 529, the best way to do it is, you know, this money you're gifting it to the children, pretty much technically, for the 529. Every year, 15,000 is you're giving away, but hopefully you will live longer, and the children will be used the money up for the 529. Now, for the estate planning point of view, there are other solution as well that you can utilize. There's a irrevocable trust. That's a better way of doing it. 529. The whole idea is use it for the benefit of the children. So if the child is going to college tomorrow, might as well just pay directly from your pocket. This is one way of doing it, but not necessarily. I would say 529 is the way for estate planning. The whole idea is for the state tax deduction and use the money for education purpose, and the money goes tax free. That's the whole idea behind it. But it's not going to have significant impact on your state taxes.
Great. Couple more questions and then we'll kind of wrap up here. Habib, anything else you see that we haven't really already addressed in terms of the questions?
Yeah, I have one more question about, will a person's property automatically go to probate or only if someone contests after the death of the person?
Yeah, so the way the process works, that if you have a property and you have no will or no trust set up, so depending on the state you live in, it has to go through court. A court needs to just appoint a trustee, husband, wife, both dies away, for the minor children or for any children to actually monitor it, just for security purpose. That's the way the process works. So that's what is called the probate process. So that's why we recommend at least have a will. It will go through it may go through probate process, but still it doesn't, like, you know what, have the court appoints who will get what. At least the will specify you will get the money even after a few months. The beauty of trust is there's no court involved into it. There's no probate involved into it. Everything is moved immediately. So that's why having a will and a trust is important to avoid all these issues.
Samia?
Okay, here's another question again about the revocable trust. If a person, sorry, I keep saying that word wrong. If a person makes a revocable trust in his name with himself being trustee, are the assets in that trust protected in a divorce situation?
Yeah, so now this is something like irrevocable trust while I'm alive and I'm the trustee of that. So that's typically, it means there are two types of it. So remember, if I just want to go back to my slide for this particular case to just explain a little bit. So this is the asset protection trust we spoke about. If you look at the last point, domestic asset protection trust, Nevada trust. So these are basically irrevocable trust. Any trust, the word says irrevocable, has elements of asset protection. Now, just to give an idea, Nevada, for example, or Delaware, if you create those trusts, those are irrevocable trusts. It is very expensive. It's cost around close to $5,000 to $10,000 setup, and there's a yearly maintenance fee of $2,000. So there's a separate trustee involved into it. If you are a trustee, you have to ask those specific trustee for the money. So that's why it has the elements of asset protection into it. Usually we see statutes between 2 to 3 years after you create a trust. If a lawsuit happens, if a divorce happens, usually it's very difficult for the creditors to get the money. So again, it's a few years wait. After the few years, usually the assets are very strong at, protection they have it. But you can create Alaska trust, you can create Virginia trust, you can create Ohio trust. These are called domestic asset protection trust. But yes, if it's an irrevocable, it does have elements of asset protection. The only concern I have it is you yourself is a trustee. Someone else should be the trustee, not the person. It should be like an attorney. It should be like a professional trustee where you don't have control over it. That's the way typically the trust works.
These are great questions. Sayed, are you open to a couple more? Or,
Sure.
okay. Habib, let's take one more question on your end, and then we'll take one more on Samia's.
So one of the questions is, if the person is less than 50 years of age, can he have backdoor IRA, and how much can be contributed? I think we did answer part of it, but maybe just repeat.
Yeah, so below 50, the amount is 6,000. Obviously, the amount goes down. Over 50 is 7,000, and you just convert it into an IRA and flip it to a Roth IRA called backdoor Roth IRA.
And then a follow-up, this is another question. Is it better to have a 529 and a UGMA account? I don't know if you've talked anything about UGMA account before.
Yeah, it's an APPNA account. So basically, APPNA account is, so there's no estate tax deduction. So the way the APPNA account works is just for the benefit of the child. That's the way it works. 529 account only needs to be used for qualified education and tuition expenses. APPNA account or UTMA account. Typically, APPNA is gone nowadays. Everyone say UTMA account. That's why it works. UTMA account, the money can be used pretty much for anything you want to. And the amount, again, the same as a 529, about 15,000 per year. You can put in without filing any gift taxes. Now, the APPNA account, the UTM account, the issue is that after the age the child becomes non-minor, let's say over the age 18 or 21, depending on the stage you live in, it needs to transfer to the child's name. The child will be completely taking over the account. So the question becomes, which one is better? So I have situations where the clients say, I don't like the 529 investment. I don't care about state taxes. Show me something else. Yeah, maybe APPNA is the way to go. We can sit down and discuss with you if the situation is better for you.
Samia?
I think we're almost caught up here, but here's one question about the SLAT, Spousal Lifetime Access Trust. What are the advantages?
Okay, so SLAT is called Spousal Lifetime Asset Protection Trust. So SLAT is basically the way it works. We spoke about the irrevocable trust. If I just go back to the slide one more time. So this is for the Biden state taxes. So you can give 22 million out of your state if you want to, right, to the children. Now, people are always worried, hey, is there any way I can have some control over this irrevocable trust? Because once you give the gift, the money belongs to the children, right? SLAT, or Spousal Lifetime Access Trust, called SLAT, is a form of irrevocable trust. It gives your spouse the right to take the money out. Again, it's a SLAT. Your spouse has the right to take the money out. And the money, the spouse can give it to you if she wants to. It's all up to you. But again, it's an irrevocable trust. It's called SLAT. We see people do it. They don't want to just give all irrevocable trust. You can create this. One solution is you can create a SLAT through your spouse. Again, can give almost 22 million. Through your spouse, you have access to it. I think it's one of the great way to control your state and give money away as well.
Fantastic. One thing I got some questions also that came to me. There's a lot of interest in these gifting to the children. The question is, a little bit of confusion is that the gift to the children, is it pre-tax or post-tax money that's given to the children?
Yeah, it's always post-tax.
Post-tax.
So, yeah.
Correct.
So you just give the money. You just give this. You don't have to worry. It's out of your state, so it grows estate tax free technically.
Perfect. And Habib and Samia, any pressing last minute question that came in before I wrap this up?
I think we've covered a bunch of questions, and I think there are a few more questions, but a lot of it Syed has already addressed. So again, I think I just want to thank everyone who has joined. So I think we can go ahead and wrap up.
Okay, well, fantastic. Syed, once again, I mean, just a fantastic presentation on your end. I know I learned a lot. I'm sure Habib and Samia learned a lot, and I'm sure our viewership learned a lot. This is, as a 501c3 organization, part of our mission is to educate and empower our members and our community. And you always do that for us, really from the EC of APPNA DMV, from Habib, Samia, myself. Thank you so much for taking this time to spend with us this evening. I know your time is very valuable. And I'd also like to thank the viewership who attended tonight. We had a very, very nice attendance, and like to thank all of you for taking your time out on a Sunday evening to join us. Syed had flashed up his information. APPNA DMV gets nothing out of this. This is purely as an educational gesture on our end, but they, Wall Street guys, are a very incredible resource to use. Please take advantage of this opportunity, and feel free to email Syed with your questions, and he's very, very responsive. Thank you so much once again, and to all of you, a very good night.
Thank you. Thank you for having me again.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.